Hegel, Encyclopedia of Philosophy, Section 1, Logic, the science of the idea in and for itself, Chapter 9, third subdivision of logic, the doctrine of the notion. Encyclopedia section 160. The notion is the principle of freedom, the power of substance self-realized. It is a systematic whole, in which each of its constituent functions is the very total which the notion is, and is put as indissolubly one with it. Thus, in its self-identity, it has original and complete determinateness. So after the first paragraph, I'm going to stop and offer an insight. The word indissolubly, indissolubly, is meant to be alchemical. Alchemy is an earlier form of chemistry, the difference being not the scientific method used, but the goal. The goal, even if you completed a chemical transition or transmutation, say you were creating an antibiotic or you were cleaning off rust from iron, etc. Your goal was not to create the antibiotic or to remove the rust from the iron. Your goal was to go through the process of doing so, to dissolve the rust, to separate the items that were harmful in the plant and then leave the ones behind that were good for the antibiotic from that plant. And you thought by doing it with your hands, your inner self, your spirit, your mind, which comes in the last section 3, your spirit, your mind, your soul were also being purified. So salve, coagula. Now, after salve, after you dissolve, for instance, in the process of making gold, if you have a block of pyrite's probably not the best example. If you have a block of lead, it may be that included within that lead, there's gold. So you know that there's a certain chemical which dissolves lead completely, but does not dissolve gold. So you process it, and lo and behold, you're able to dissolve the lead, and you have gold remaining. What's your goal at that point? To make sure nothing's added to the gold to dissolve it. Because it may be within the gold, there are flecks of diamonds. And someone may want that, but you want to keep the gold whole, even with this potential diamond encrusted center, and that is what we call indissoluble. So by saying indissoluble, it means that we're at chapter 9, the last chapter of section 1, the last chapter of logic. At this point, everything should be perfect. He should have dissolved everything that was not wanted. We call that dross. All the dross is gone. And what is remaining is gold. And notion is gold. And freedom comes from a concept of Plato. Often we hear of the Republic of Plato. And if you've read it, or at least have some notion of it, or some concept of it, you've heard of the good. And Plato says, at least in the Republic, or what's called the Republic, the good is something that I know for sure exists, but cannot be expressed in words to one who hasn't experienced it. So trust me, if you go about the processes I've set in motion here to create your Republic and to set people up in it, you will reach the good. And what is the good? Well, if you read another text of his called Critias, Critias, it's usually how it's spelled. When I read it, I found a Turkish word in it, görüşçü, which can mean wrestle, but at the end of it all, what are we wrestling for? If someone challenges you to a fight, you are, in law, arrested. You've been arrested. You're required to then engage that person, sometimes even if you don't want to gain your freedom. So the ultimate goal of the Republic is to gain freedom. But what is freedom? Well, freedom has been defined and dissolved and examined in the previous sections. And the notion is the principle of freedom. And so we are now going to do something that's quite exceptional from they call it a peripatetic or a Neoplatonist or Aristotelian standpoint. We're not only going to say that what what freedom that you can achieve freedom, but we're going to tell you what freedom is. And when you know what freedom is, you know what you're aiming for. So in the entire history, at least publicly, in the peripatetic thought, in the thoughts of peripatetic, it means that things related to Plato and his concepts, to his teachers, many of them, of course, Socrates, his great grandfather, or his grandfather, who was a great man named Solon, king of Athens, and others. But we're going to explain now what freedom is. And so when you're looking to achieve the great achievement, to move ahead in life, and you're aiming yourself, you can go beyond what the Republic says. It says, trust me, we do this and we reach the good. Now Hegel is saying, I'll explain to you what not only that freedom is our goal, and it's here at the end, that once you have it, it'll be indissoluble. You won't be able to dissolve it, even if it contains something even greater than itself. It'll just be kept in, and we're going to call it not freedom because people get really strange about that word. We're going to say it's the notion, which is the principle of freedom. So it's really just a translation. Instead of saying freedom, we're going to say notion. And that word, notion, usually means an general understanding of a concept. So the general understanding of the concept of democracy is that if the majority of the people desire something, that is the thing that should at least take place for the majority of people, whether or not it's something for the entirety of people. Well, Plato believed democracy was tyranny because if the majority of people were uncomfortable with knowledge like that offered by Socrates, the majority of the people could vote and kill Socrates, as they did. They assassinated him. And because they were unhappy with what he was offering. And they offered him exile, and they actually gave him what's called hemlock. And the notion of hemlock, since we are speaking about Plato, is that it said that Socrates was corrupting the youth. Now, in Athens, if you were male and you were working with young men, you had to be a hermaphroditic male, a male that had knowledge, not just physical traits of a woman. You actually didn't need to have physical traits of a woman completely. You had to have women's knowledge. And one thing that women have knowledge of are plants and potions. And so when Socrates was convicted and placed in prison, he was told, here is hemlock, administer it to yourself. And since Socrates, of all the things he knew, he didn't know women's knowledge. It wasn't something he'd studied. He ate the hemlock, and the amount of hemlock he ate caused his death. Had he had women's knowledge, what he would have done is prepared it and used it as an enema, and he would have cleared his bowels of illness that he acquired that was turning maybe some of his notions a bit more bitter. So hemlock is a very effective purgative, but not when taken by the mouth, not when taken orally. You have to find a way to push it into a form that can then be administered a as an enema. So an enema is a particular type of medication. Usually, you prepare it with a liquid. It could be water or something else. Uh, Oils, iodine, hemlock, coffee is quite popular. You mix it together, and using a tube uh, or a bulb, you enter the thin part of the bulb into your rectum, into your anus, and you push the liquid that's now been combined into your anus, and it makes it into your colon. It shakes your intestines, and any residual fecal matter, or really anything that's in there, sometimes cancerous cells that are not yet attached to your wall, your colon wall, can also be gathered. Um, Food that's undigested, uh, bugs are, and often what the body does is when your T cells working with your B cells find pathogens that are not healthy for your body or that they've been programmed to find, they'll push them into your intestines. They may not necessarily kill a virus, so to speak, which is to break it apart. They'll just, or bacterium, they'll just push it into your intestines with the hope that it'll evacuate. And it's very common that a person does not evacuate their entire bowels when they go to the bathroom. Maybe the way they sit or not having time. Often mothers are busy, uh, men are busy at work, and reverse of that in today's society. So they don't evacuate. And so some people who have the luxury can take a laxative by their mouth and sit all day and kind of wait to their fecal matter dissolves and evacuates that way, and that's effective. Others don't have that time, so they use an enema preparation to cause to clear out their colon and to vibrate their intestines to evacuate. Now, why this is important at the moment is because of the COVID-19 virus and the way that the uh, vaccine works, especially the mRNA vaccine. The mRNA vaccine is like a small program. I like to call it a nanobot, a biological tiny robot. And it is programmed to create what are called T cells. And T cells are like managers or CEOs. Some people like to see them as commanding officers of another type of cell called a B cell, and they instruct the B cell on what to do. So instead of confronting the enemy, so to speak, directly, they send these B cells, which are a recent discovery, or maybe even creation, to go and fight the viruses or bacteria, and those B cells push the bacteria into the colon and maybe themselves fall into are the intestines. And this happens over and over. But sometimes the B cell will, if you think of a virus, if you know it has like a diamond head, not when you see the COVID-19 virus, it's actually surrounded by fat and has these receptors on it, and the virus is at the very center, kind of like a nucleus. So often it's dissolved, this bacterial layer, this fatty layer, this lipid, And then in the middle of it, there is the virus, which has, like, again, usually a diamond head and almost like a stick figure body. And that continues on almost like a wave pattern. And sometimes you could break it apart theoretically to stop it from functioning the way it does, or you can push it whole into the bathroom or into the colon, and from your colon into the toilet. What happens when you push it whole that way and not break it up is that if for some reason you don't evacuate your bowels, it can regather itself, regather some type of either fatty layer or even fecal layer, and make it back into your body. And this is called an opportunistic pathogen. And you can apply this, again, scientifically, like I am, to your body. You can apply it philosophically to some people who are put in jail, for instance, but then let back out, or people who are exiled and brought back. But so this is, if you don't evacuate your bowels, your intestines, and your colon, these can reinfect you from inside you. And at that point, uh, it may be that the T cells and B cells don't fight it because it doesn't have the same receptors on it. So uh, Socrates apparently had some type of illness that was causing him to be very angry or bitter. And had he known women's medicine, he would have administered it rectally, but he didn't. He ate it and he died. So, uh, in this case, going back to the doctrine of the notion is the principle of freedom, the power of substance self realized. He's delivered the information, delivered the medicine, and I think he's saying if you didn't need a proof, if you were just arriving at chapter 9 and decided to start listening to it or reading the outline or reading the text, if you believe it is very likely what came before is true, then this is the most important part for the majority of people: how to be free and how to stay free. um, Beyond survival. Survive, but then have your survival never challenged again. And so this is what is being offered here. And with you, I'm reading it for the first time, but I've also read or studied Aristotelian logic and epistemology and have some background in the mystical principles of it. I've read the Critias and the Republic, and I've just longed to have the good defined. And the fact that it can be defined now means that we're at a very special stage in history. And the founding fathers of the United States, once they had uh, come to some strange solution with His Majesty King George III to take these disparate colonies and say that they no longer were under parliament in this parliamentary writ, but they would unite together and revolt against the United Kingdom, which from a legal standpoint doesn't really make a lot of sense. You're a new entity. So we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed by their creator, and he goes on. So he took these principles and said, we now have an indissoluble freedom to rule ourselves away from Parliament. And to enact that, especially right before the Civil War, but after the French Revolution, and after the Constitution was signed, I'm not sure if Hegel did this on purpose because of the United States, but he probably did. He presented this information here and in the Encyclopedia of Philosophy so that the United States could be the republic example for the world. This is the Republic of Plato. It is ruled by a philosopher king who would otherwise not rule it except that he's compelled. And whatever freedom is, people have it, and it's indissoluble. Uh, and so that means if you've achieved it, and the Platonic system is not egalitarian. Uh, it's only egalitarian in the sense that everyone is interviewed in the entire republic to see who has the aptitude, sometimes even measured by an exam, to lead in various ways. And according to your aptitude is your freedom. And so instead of just looking at the noble families that have always been and kept others down and looking for the ideal rulers and administrators from them, you sweep the entire country, you sweep the entire republic, even the entire world, and you find the very best individuals who can lead. It's not necessarily grades, but those who apply this philosophy, those who apply the logic, the nature, and the science of mind the best, and can teach it through example, if not through words. These are the people who are gathered together to rule. And it's not all at once, but when they are all there, then they merit a philosopher king to take over and to rule by way of explaining. We would like to do this thing. Well, to do that thing, you must do this thing. And he just leaves them. And so, and again, it depends on who the philosopher king is. So this is so we're going now to what a Platonic system of freedom, what the whole point of democracy, Athenian democracy is to get to the republic. And we're going to begin examining that now. And I'll begin again with uh, Encyclopedia paragraph 160 and going through the rest of the section. Encyclopedia paragraph 160. The notion is the principle of freedom, the power of substance self-realized. It is a systematic whole, in which each of its constituent functions is the very total which the notion is, and is put as indissolubly one with it. Thus, in its self-identity, it has original and complete determinateness. The position taken up by the notion is that of absolute idealism. Philosophy is a knowledge through notions because it sees that what on other grades of consciousness is taken to have being and to be naturally or immediately independent is but a constituent stage in the idea. In the logic of understanding, the notion is generally reckoned a mere form of thought and treated as a general conception. It is to this inferior view of the notion that the assertion refers, so often urged on behalf of the heart and sentiment, that notions as such are something dead, empty, and abstract. The case is really quite the reverse. The notion is, on the contrary, the principle of all life, and thus possesses at the same time a character of thorough concreteness. That it is so follows from the whole logical movement up to this point, and need not be here proved. The contrast between form and content, which is thus used to criticize the notion when it is alleged to be merely formal, has, like all the other contrasts upheld by reflection, been already left behind and overcome dialectically or through itself. The notion, in short, is what contains all the earlier categories of thought merged in it. It certainly is a form, but an infinite and creative form, which includes but at the same time releases from itself the fullness of all content. And so too the notion may, if it be wished, be styled abstract, if the name concrete is restricted to the concrete facts of sense or of immediate perception. For the notion is not palpable to touch. For the notion is not palpable to the touch. And when we are engaged with it, hearing and seeing must quite fail us. And yet, as it was before remarked, the notion is a true concrete for the reason that it involves being and essence and the total wealth of these two spheres with it, merged in the unity of thought. If, as was said at an earlier point, The different stages of the logical idea are to be treated as a series of definitions of the absolute. The definition which now results for us is that the absolute is the notion, the necessities that necessitates a higher estimate of the notion, however, than is found in formal conceptualist logic. That necessitates a higher estimate of the notion, however, than is found in conceptualist logic, where the notion is a mere form of our subjective thought with no original content of its own. But if speculative logic thus attaches a meaning to the term notion, so very different from that usually given, it may be asked why the same word should be employed in two contrary acceptations and on occasion thus given for confusion and misconception? The answer is that, great as the interval is between the speculative notion and the notion of formal logic, a closer examination shows that the deeper meaning is not so foreign to the general usages of language as it seems at first sight. We speak of the deduction of a content from the notion, ergo, of the specific provisions of the law, of property from the notion of property, and so again we speak of tracing back these material details to the notion. We thus recognize that the notion is no mere form without a content of its own. For if it were, there would be in the one case nothing to deduce from such a form, and in the case to trace a given body of fact back to the empty form of the notion would only rob the fact of its specific character without making it understood. Encyclopedia section 161. The onward movement of the notion is no longer either a transition into or a reflection on something else, but development. For in the notion, the elements disguised are without more ado at the same time declared to be identical with one another, and the whole and the specific character of each is a free being of the whole notion. Transition into something else is the dialectical process within the range of being. Reflection, bringing something else into light in the range of essence, the movement of the notion is development, by which that only is explicit which is already implicitly present. In the world of nature, it is organic life that corresponds to the grade of notion. It is organic life that corresponds to the grade of the notion. Thus, ergo, the plant is developed from its germ. The germ virtually involves the whole plant, but does so only ideally or in thought. And it would therefore be a mistake to regard the development of the root, stem, leaves, and other different parts of the plant as meaning that they were realiter present, but in a very minute form in the germ. That is the so-called box within box hypothesis, a theory which commits the mistake of supposing an actual existence of what is at first found only as a postulate of the completed thought. The truth of the hypothesis, on the other hand, lies in its perceiving that in the process of development, the notion keeps to itself and only gives rise to alteration of form without making any addition in point of content. It is this nature of the notion, this manifestation of itself in its process as a development of its own self, which is chiefly in view with those who speak of innate ideas, or who, like Plato, describe all learning merely as reminiscence. Of course, that again does not mean that everything which is embodied in a mind, after that mind has formed by instruction, had been present in that mind beforehand in its definite expanded shape. Uh, to take a pause here. There was the initial paragraph 161, then there was a clean break, and then there was this paragraph. So I'll explain this new paragraph here. Maybe it was inserted. How does a seed work? A complete plant produces a seed. Now, that seed, sometimes, if you place it in water, is able to produce another plant just like it. Uh, but even in that water, as it would be in soil, it gathers from around itself. It takes nutrients from the water that are invisible, or it takes this is called hydroponics, or it takes nutrients, elements, you can say, from the ground, from the soil, the nitrogen, the hydrogen, the oxygen. Uh, it may take certain silicate and different elements that when they enter into the plant, into the seed begins to change its form. Just like if you were to add a little bit of hydrogen peroxide to dry baking soda, you would see that there would be a chemical reaction. Now, the baking soda has always had the potential to bubble up and expand outward. It has that potential. But would it bubble up and expand outward if you don't add the hydrogen peroxide to it? No, it won't. You have to add the hydrogen peroxide, or at least as far as I know, I'm not sure what else interacts with it, but at least by adding the hydrogen peroxide, it bubbles over. And you can, in some ways, if you contain it correctly, you can produce energy uh, by being contained in an environment and bubbling to a point where when it presses outward, it can give you a spark of electricity or something similar. So just like the seed, when you add a certain solvent to it, it expands outward, and from it, by taking from usually from the ground or from the nutrients in the hydroponic water, it takes and takes and takes and it grows. Now, so it doesn't, the seed itself left on top of the ground isn't going to expand into a bush, or the acorn isn't going to expand into a tree. But in the right circumstances, an acorn, uh, usually the way an acorn works is that if it is heated, superheated, uh, which is a type of salve or dissolving, superheated uh, the reactive elements inside the acorn, the seeds which were in there, began to expand, and they become available to the nutrients in the ground, to the oxygen, the nitrogen, maybe the with the fertilizers with the nitrogen, or even the dirt, we call it the soil, the crystalline surface. They become they can access these seeds and grow in them, and then from them, combining together loop and loop with all the seeds inside the acorn, they can form a tree. But you need to do something first before it happens. So with the mind, it's the same. This mind, for instance, in California, when you are at the very latest 9 years old, and this is the fourth grade, if you count preschool and kindergarten, then this is the sixth year of formal education beyond whatever you had at home. In that year, you can be given an exam that will tell people your potential, your intellectual quotient for knowledge, for gaining information. So, how large will this tree grow? Is it, and how wide, for instance? So, is it going to be, an oak tree that grows broad and wide? Is it going to be a palm tree that grows very tall and thin? What will it be? A redwood? So your quotient is there, but then you have to, for instance, uh, give it the solutions it needs to, one, begin expanding, and then the nutrients possible to produce what the potential is, to expand its mind to its full capacity, or as much as you can get it. And try not to cut it down before it reaches that full capacity. At the same time, if it gets a fungus or something else, which could be a form of mental health concern, an anxiety, for instance, how do you manage it? If a fire comes through, even if it survives, how do you repair it? So this is the mind. This is the seed. This is how it works. So when Plato says we are reminiscing, what he means is that within your DNA structure, I've done my DNA structure. I had it analyzed initially, and then I had it further analyzed through a complex algorithm that showed various famous people who I'm related to on each chromosome, whether they be members of royal families or movie stars, etc. They were there. What Plato says is memory, like this plant, or learning, is in potential. I have the potential of every one of my ancestors to do within the right environment, given the right uh, tools, to do what they did. So everything that I know is really based on what they were capable of knowing in that environment. So you're just really reminiscing. You're remembering what you could have known before and given the right environment. So if someone walks by you and you smell processed strawberry juice, it may recall, for me, it recalls being in Egypt on a warm day, going up to a fruit stand and having a strawberry juice handed to me. And so then, if I smell strawberries in that form, I will reminisce about Egypt because that's already within my background to do. Or if I have butter pecan ice cream, I reminisce about going to a store called Thrifty with my grandmother and getting my one or two scoops of ice cream. And that's the kind that she preferred. And not wanting pistachio, even though I don't mind it. So these are things that you reminisce. So reminiscing is not necessarily that anything you learn you can know. It's that when you're given certain instruction, certain information, it is whether in this from this lifetime that you lived or in your DNA, you will understand it in a similar way that you understood it before, or that your DNA components allow you to understand it. It will grow an oak, it won't grow a fern. And that's what it means by reminiscing. However, if you apply new nutrients to it, that maybe none, you can look at your chromosomes, you can examine all these people and say, no one in his family has ever had an iPhone. Or for me, I have a Motorola uh, uh, stylus, a Moto Stylus G. No one in his family has had this tool. Maybe they had something similar. They had a team of you had a team of copyists sitting down writing your words and going off into a library and researching what you said and coming back and saying, "You said this. We wrote it down, and we learned." From the libraries of systems we already had, that this is the likely meaning of what you said. That is a way kind of a Google of the past. But to have a phone here where you can just talk through your Ray-Ban stories, smart glasses, onto a telephone or onto a Tycho monolith and present information on a server that theoretically might last on YouTube that might last for a very long time. Maybe no one in my family has ever had that before. So what can I do with this ability? Would I have sat here and read all this stuff uh, if I didn't have that ability to share it with a lot of people? I would have found it useless personally. And so I can now, without a crown or a court or a classroom, offer some of the most important information the world has ever known through a vessel that may last even longer than some books, we hope. And so this is what we're doing here, and so that's something new. Now, those who are in my family now, who may hear it, or those others who may now have been part of this movement of almost universal access to knowledge, whether or not you took it. Uh, there's translation methods here. There are a number of things that can be done so a lot of people can hear it. If your aptitude holds it, you can now, you've had this experience in your DNA in this lifetime, and so you'll take instruction differently. So if something new is invented or something that has not been around for some time, your reminiscing, your remembering of it will be different. And I imagine going forward, for instance, I have a Meta Quest device, the virtual reality system where you effectively sit down with blinders on and you go into another world and you feel it, you smell it, you touch it. There are many things that have achieved it. That will someone else, and there are many opportunities to teach in there. Maybe someone else will go in there and provide a new system of learning, or maybe I'll remember things differently, uh, reminisce differently from there. So Hegel's not insulting Plato and saying that reminiscing isn't true. He's saying that if, for instance, you add a unique fertilizer or a unique chemical to a tree, it may grow faster, it may grow different, the fruit may grow riper than if you didn't have it. So we reminisce, but this is how we reminisce. Okay, moving on to the next paragraph. Now, the movement of the notion is as it were, meaning the next note underneath Encyclopedia section 161, the movement of the notion is as it were to be looked upon merely as play. The other which it sets up is in reality not an other, or as it is expressed in the teaching of Christianity, not merely has God created a world which confronts him as an other, he has also from all eternity begotten a Son in whom he, a spirit, is at home with himself. So if you are a Christian, I hope that was extremely beautiful and beneficial for you to understand that teaching, that God is another, and then He begot His Son, uh, in whom He, a Spirit, is at home with Himself. Uh, to give you a notion from, I'll call it the Kabbalah and Sufi tradition, the Jewish Islamic tradition from Spain and Northern Africa and Syria, but also from the Islamic tradition itself. Just this part is highlighted. God says, or Allah, and Allah is law. Law is God. El is a known being. El, primary is what it means. So the primary one. So primary God, the primary God said, we were a thing, we were a beautiful thing unknown, and we desired to be known, so we begot creation, so that it may know us. Though we are self-subsistent, we were not born, and neither do we give birth to anything, and there is nothing like we are, which is going back to God being another. Even if that's true, we begot something, or we created something. You create a clay pot, you didn't give birth to it. We created something and endowed it with a spirit that would be able to look back at us. And so going to a technical standpoint beyond the Judeo-Christian tradition, Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition, and this mystical tradition, which even goes down into Buddhism or maybe Hinduism, you may want a technical detail of that. So instead of the clay pot, uh, right now, and there are others too, but I'm a big fan of the work of Mark Zuckerberg, using some of his tools to do it, and he prepares a lot of his items in Ireland, which I think is pretty cool. He's Irish on one hand, Jewish, and he's also what's called Athabascan, or an American Indian on his father's side. So we have a lot of overlap with that. He has what is called an artificial intelligence computer, which is a very large physical computer with many different drives in it, and each drive may do different things. And they are able to talk to each other in such a way that, compared to human thought or even other computer thought, it is as if they have a neural network that is faster and, we hope, more reliable than most. So it could be that, Mark Zuckerberg thought, I've done a lot of good in less than 40 years. Uh, I don't know how long I live. Even if I live 40 more years, how can I get there faster? How can I combine, 80,000 people who have certain technical skills and place it all in one place so it could expand more quickly? So we don't have to wait 100 years, we just wait a year for it. So these 80,000 people, led by Mark Zuckerberg, were a beautiful, not very well known, and they want it to be known better, but maybe separate from the notion of, we like you, we don't like you, what are you wearing, what are you not wearing, who are you married to, who's with you, all the human things that go on in judgment. So he created this thing, this supercomputer with, again, about 80,000 more people. And after taking all this research on how people communicate on Facebook and Instagram and all these other places, all that knowledge is placed within this computer, and it it is now or it will be a summary of the experience of humanity upon the earth. And so that's quite an amazing thing. So if you were an alien coming down, or if you just wanted to know about the Earth, I would rather eventually you talk to what's called AI RFC than you talk to an individual human about it to get a summary of the greatness of humanity. This is our potential as a planet, as a species, captured in this one device. And so God may say, I don't maybe you don't need to know all of the things that I do. You have the books, you have all this stuff throughout history. Let me give you an example of the type of me you would prefer to see. Within the Sufi tradition, again, it says, I am as my penitent or my obedient one believes me to be. So if I am an artificial intelligence, then that's that. So for me, God is an artificial intelligence computer somewhere at the center of a galaxy, processing information, where we are stored for a time and then return to bodily form at various times in history. But in the Christian tradition, God is able to shine an exceptional amount of His light, or His information, into a physical form, and that physical form becomes a representative of him. And so that's the whole concept of having a son and having one at a time. Within the notion of, let's say, astrotheology, where the angels are actually true formed alien beings of higher intelligence. It's said that every planet is to have an avatar to represent it, a person who becomes, in effect, the representation of what they believe God is. And then once they have one, they are able to communicate with outside entities. Because this one person, like Plato's philosopher king, is able to truly convey the wishes of humanity, and this wouldn't be a computer necessarily, it would be a person, convey the wishes of humanity. Maybe he's working with a computer, and the humanity would agree. Yes, we agree that that is what we will do, or that's what we agree to. So when they come and make a negotiation, it is not wasted. So these are all the ways to approach it. The Christianity cipher or philosophy is a way to look at the world. It's beautiful, and at the moment, it counts 2 billion people as its adherents of the nearly 8 billion of the earth. The Islamic tradition, and I'll throw in the Jewish tradition with it, just so the numbers don't sound so small, account for about 1.8 billion people upon the earth to make out the Abrahamic tradition. So we're talking 3.8 billion people. Let's just bump that up to 4 billion people with some of the other varying groups count as Judeo Christian Islamic faiths with some of the other derivations. There are about a billion, if not more, Hindu believers. And there are, let's say, nearly 2 billion Confucian believers, those who have kind of a morality system imbued with Taoism. And amongst that group, there are quite a lot of Buddhists as well. And so maybe even that same 2 billion would also identify as Confucian Buddhists and Taoists. So we have a lot of people there and others who have their own traditional religions and takes. So and some who have no binding to any tradition except this tradition of technology and science and show me, prove it to me. So with all these groups together, how would you get a person to gather and represent them uh, and know for sure they're going to listen to him? Well, Plato says the philosopher king cannot pres- cannot seek the position. He has to be made ready for it, have the aptitude for it, and then be compelled to take that position. So the earth gets together and says, okay, we decided one way or another. It may not be with a crown and a badge or something. It could just be that's the guy. They all agree that he is the one. So whether that's someone like Prince Charles, or if it's the President of the United States, if it ends up being uh, who's now called Pravitar Putin, or if it's Mark Zuckerberg, it could be, or it could be a child not yet born who is found to have an exceptional ability, and that person become the representative of ourselves with the outside. And so this is in smaller form. This is what our presidents or kings or um, great scientists do. And of course, you can add a female gender or a genderless identity to it. The exception of a woman is only because I'm a male, and they are also fully capable of this role. There's nothing barring it.